In 1995, philosopher David Chalmers published a paper in the Journal of Consciousness Studies that named a problem neuroscience had been circling for decades without being able to state precisely. He called it the hard problem of consciousness. The paper was not a solution. It was a diagnosis. Chalmers drew a distinction between what he called the easy problems of consciousness, attention, memory, perception, the control of behavior, and the one that no method in science had ever touched. The easy problems, he argued, are not easy in the ordinary sense. They are extraordinarily complex, but they are, at least in principle, tractable. Given enough time and enough neuroscience, we can imagine how a physical system, a brain, could process sensory input, store memories, direct attention. We can see how neurons could, in theory, do those things. The hard problem is different. The hard problem is this: why does any of that processing feel like anything at all? Within a year, the term was in use across the field. Within a decade, it had become the organizing question of an entire scientific discipline. 30 years later, it has not been answered. You have been conscious for as long as you can remember. Every morning you wake up, the experience returns. The particular quality of light through a window, the weight of your body against the mattress, the sensation of being a self in a world. You don't notice it because you've never not had it. Consciousness is so constant, so total, that it disappears into the background of everything else. Neuroscience describes the brain in extraordinary detail. It maps the circuits that process visual information, the networks that consolidate memory during sleep, the regions that generate emotional responses. It tracks the millisecond by millisecond activity of billions of neurons. The tools for this work are more precise now than at any point in history. And yet, somewhere between the physical description and the experience of being you, something is missing. The description says, photons hit the retina, signals travel to the visual cortex, the brain constructs a representation of a face. The experience says, I see a face and there is something it is like to see it, something vivid and present and mine. No bridge in the description leads from the physical signal to the felt experience. The physical account is complete on its own terms. The experience is also real. The gap between them is what Chalmers named. The paper began with a distinction that seems obvious once stated and had not been clearly stated before. Some problems about consciousness, Chalmers wrote, are what he called easy. The brain needs to integrate information. It needs to focus attention selectively. It needs to report on its own internal states. It needs to distinguish sleep from waking. These functions are all, in principle, explainable by neural mechanisms, not simple but in the same category as other scientific problems. Given a complete map of the brain, you could, in principle, understand how they work. The hard problem is different in kind, not just in degree. Even a complete neural map would leave something unexplained. Why any of those processes should be accompanied by experience. Why, when light hits your retina and signals traverse your visual cortex, there is something it is like to see the color blue, a specific irreducible quality that is not in the wavelength, not in the neuron, not in the signal. The quality of the experience itself. Philosophers call these qualities qualia. The redness of red, the pain of pain, the taste of coffee, the particular character of what you are experiencing right now. Reading this sentence, Chalmers formulated the point as a challenge. Even if you explained every function a brain performs, every behavior it produces, every signal it processes, you would still have left something out. You would not have explained why any of that functioning feels like anything. You would have explained the machine, not the experience of running it. The explanatory gap, as it was already being called, had a name now. 9 years after Chalmers named the problem, neuroscientist Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin proposed a mathematical framework for tackling it. Tononi's theory, integrated information theory, or IIT, proposed that consciousness is not a function the brain performs. It is a property the brain has. Specifically, it is the degree to which a system integrates information beyond what its parts do separately. He called the measure phi the Greek letter phi. The core idea was this: a system with high phi processes information in a way that cannot be fully understood by looking at its parts in isolation. The whole does more than the sum of the parts. Tononi argued that this kind of integration is what distinguishes a conscious system from an unconscious one. The theory made specific predictions. The thalamocortical system, the network connecting the thalamus to the cortex, should have high phi during waking. The cerebellum, despite its nearly 70 billion neurons, should have much lower phi. It processes signals in parallel, with minimal integration between its modules. That's why Tononi argued cerebellar damage doesn't eliminate consciousness. The cerebellum contributes to movement, but not to experience. During deep sleep, phi drops. During anesthesia, it drops further. During coma, it approaches zero. The theory did not solve the hard problem. Tononi himself was explicit about this. IIT identifies what physical property correlates with consciousness. It does not explain why any amount of integrated information should feel like anything. The gap between the measure and the experience remained. But it made a prediction that could be tested in a brain. Right now, the network Tononi described is active. The thalamocortical system, the looping connection between your thalamus and the layers of your cortex, is generating something. Not just processing sensory input, not just directing attention, generating the particular, irreducible quality of what it is like to be you right now. That quality is so obvious to you that you don't think about it. It's the water you swim in. It is experience itself, the fact that there is something going on, that you are here, that this sentence lands with meaning and not just signal. A thermostat registers temperature. It responds to the environment. It does not experience temperature. Something changed when the system became complex enough that there was someone home. That change is what the hard problem is pointing at. You are the change. The experience you are having right now, however ordinary, however unremarkable, is the single most mysterious thing in science. Not because it's rare, because it's everywhere, in every conscious mind, and no one has explained where it comes from. In 2005, Marcello Massimini and Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin made the first direct empirical measurement of what cortical integration looks like when consciousness is present, and what it looks like when it isn't. The method was TMSEEG, transcranial magnetic stimulation combined with high-density electroencephalography. A brief magnetic pulse delivered to the skull causes a small region of cortex to activate. The EEG records what happens next. During waking, something remarkable occurs. The pulse does not stay local. It propagates, rippling outward through a network of connected regions, generating a complex pattern of neural activity that spreads across the cortex over the following several hundred milliseconds. The cortex responds as a connected whole. During slow-wave sleep, when consciousness is reduced, the same pulse does something different. It activates the local region, but the signal doesn't travel. It reverberates briefly at the site of stimulation, then fades. The cortex does not respond as a whole. The long-range connections are effectively silent. Massimini and Tononi called this the breakdown of cortical affective connectivity. What they had found was a measurable signature of the transition between consciousness and its absence. Not a theory, a measurement. You could watch consciousness switch off in the EEG record. And then, in the morning, when sleep ended and waking returned, the pattern changed back. The pulse began to propagate again. The experiment was important. But notice what it didn't do. It showed that consciousness correlates with cortical integration. It did not explain why integration feels like anything. It did not close the gap between the signal and the experience. It moved the hard problem one step forward and left it still open. The circuit can be mapped. Why the circuit feels like anything is not in the map. Chalmers' paper is 30 years old. In those 30 years, the neuroscience of consciousness has become one of the most active research programs in science. Phi has been measured. The moment consciousness turns on in the morning has been recorded in an EEG. The specific networks that generate experience have been identified. The difference between a conscious brain and an anesthetized one can now be read from a scanner. And the hard problem remains. Not because neuroscience has failed. Because the hard problem is not a problem about which neurons are active. It is a problem about why neurons or anything physical should produce experience at all. Why there is something it is like to be a system that processes information. Why the light hitting your retina is not just a signal but a sight. Chalmers called this the explanatory gap. In 30 years, the gap has not been bridged. The map of the brain has become extraordinary. The territory the map does not include is the experience of reading it. You are conscious right now. You know this in a way you cannot prove to anyone else and cannot doubt for yourself. That is the only thing in this field that everyone agrees on. And it is the one thing no one can explain. What happens when that experience is taken away? Not gradually, the way sleep takes it, but suddenly, chemically, in an operating room, and what the brain does in the minutes before it returns,